Welcome to Dan's Talks. My guest today is Bill Finnegan, who's an author who's written an incredible book that I've read some years ago and I've started rereading, called Barbarian Days, which won the Pulitzer Prize. It's about surfing. And in the book, he talks about Montauk. And so I think we'll start with that. But you're going to be talking at the Montauk Library, is it? At next Wednesday, July 14th.
Now, June 14th, that's right.
June 14th. What are you expecting to talk about there?
I'm not sure. It's an evening thing. I'll give a reading. I think there might be an onstage interview. I'm going to talk to the organizers in the week ahead and see exactly what they want from me. I think it's a fundraiser for the library. The group's called the Friends of the Library in Montauk.
Yep.
So,
and
6:30 in the evening.
Toward the back of the book, there's a chapter that includes a lot of talk about your time in Montauk. When was that? How long ago was that?
That was in the 90s. I've been living in New York City since the 80s, but not really surfing much locally. I'd come from Hawaii and the West Coast and thought of the East Coast as not having any waves. But then I met this guy, his name's Peter Spacek. He, in that time, lived in the city and had a summer place, he shared in Ditch Plains. And he turned me on to the surf at the East End. And I started surfing out there a lot.
Well, you've been to, in your book, you write about being in places like Fiji and Madeira and Cape Town. And by the way, I visited Dungeons when I was out there. I was going out from Cape Town out to the Cape, and a taxi driver took us down there to have a look at the surf on the way to the Penguins, I might add. So, how does Montauk stack up? It's not a particularly great surfer, is it?
Well, every now and then, it has its moments. Every dog has its day. I mostly nowadays surf in Montauk. I live in the city on hurricane swells, and on the right hurricane swell, like last September, there was a day when Montauk could, hold its head up high in the world of surfing. I mean, it was an amazing day of waves.
What time of year was it?
That was last September.
Wow. Well, I've been out there a long time, and I've never seen huge surf at all. By the way, that surf was a ditch is entirely caused by the building of a jetty that sticks out from what used to be a East Deck motel. And I remember it being built. It was, I came out there in the 50s, and Sam Cox, who was from Barbados, built this jetty to protect his motel. That's what he did. And he had
Makes sense. I mean, Ditch Plains is a really important place topographically, if you can believe it. I mean, the South Shore of Long Island is all sand for like 100 miles from Coney Island to Montauk Town. There's a little rock reef there at Shadmore, but it's all sand, just amazingly consistent sand and barrier islands. And then at Ditch Plains, at where that little stub of a jetty was, the bottom turns from sand to rock, and it's rock the rest of the way to the point, of course. And on that edge where it changes from sand to rock, that's the long left at Ditch Plains that made it a popular surf spot.
Wow. Well, talk a little bit about your book and Barbarian Days, and then if you've done what you've been doing since, and some of the other books that have come out to
Sure. Well, I'm a staff writer at the New Yorker, so I churn out pieces here. I have a piece in the magazine today, a column, a political column. I've written a lot of political columns there. And broadly speaking, I write about politics, but I mean, the last big piece I had in the magazine was a couple of months ago, and it's about Penn Station and Madison Square Garden, all these kind of city power struggles and outrages. So as I say, it's politics pretty broadly defined, but about half my work, I guess, over the long haul, I've been on staff at the New Yorker since 1987, so a long time. and about half of it's been international. So like my first 3 books were all about Southern Africa. And I've just written about, different conflicts around the world over the long haul for the New Yorker in Africa, South America, the Balkans, and so on, Central America. So it's a kind of a mixed bag, but of course, after a bunch of serious books, including books about American politics and problems, I wrote one about my hobby, Barbarian Days, about surfing, and that book has sold more than all the others put together, I think.
Why do you think that is? I mean, I can tell you, but you tell me.
Well, it just pulled people in. It's a memoir. It's not all about surfing, and most of the readers don't surf or don't even know anything about surfing. So it's a kind of open heart book about my life with sort of surfing as a theme, as a main thread since my childhood. And so it's about my family and friends, and it's a pretty personal book. These others are I'm often in there as a first person narrator, but they're about politics and power and they all did fine, but Barbarian Days just took off. I don't know why.
Well, I think I know why. I think you have a great talent for actually putting the reader into the place where you are, which is often in the water and almost in trouble, from how to avoid it and why it's so wonderful and where you are and who you met. And much of the book is about native things ceremonies and things that you encountered over the years of going around the world and being in places that were very remote. That's why that book was so amazing. And I'm glad to meet you. And I really enjoyed reading the book. And at the time, I noticed. Did you keep a diary of all your surfing days so you could remember all the people you spoke to and the things you did? It's an amazing accomplishment.
I did keep journals since I was very young, but a lot of the material for the book came from letters that I managed. This was in the golden age of letter writing, still handwritten letters. And I mean, some of the early stuff in the book from the 60s, 70s, maybe even into the 80s. And I managed to get some of those letters back from friends and family, and those had tremendous amount of detail. My journals were not as good as I wish they were. They were about what was going on and the people we met. And I did spend a long time in the South Pacific and Southeast Asia and other far-flung parts of the world when I was young. But my journals were full of kind of self-involved. I saw myself as a writer. Surfing was just what I did. Writing was what I was. And they're all agonies about how this story isn't working and I'm writing this in the wrong style and really tedious stuff. But there's a fair amount. I mean, I got like a whole shelf full of journals. Yes.
Well, when you describe where you are in a very specific way in the water and what you see around you and where the wind is coming from and what the reef is like and how this might change what you do and what people are out there. It's amazing book.
Thanks.
How do you come out east often in the summer or at any other times?
Not so much in the summer, more in the fall for the hurricane swells. I was out there a couple of times on hurricane swells last fall. There was a great one in late September. Really kind of a one-day swell, but just excellent waves. So I watch the forecasts and try to time my trips and get there when the waves get there.
What do you, in all the different places you've been, where do you think the most exciting surf you found, or which 2 or 3 places?
Yeah, it's a combination usually of of the waves, of course, and the season, being there at the right time. And also, though, how well known the place is, whether it's full of people, which makes it less fun, less accessible to waves. You got to compete more. And so that said, there's a wave in Fiji called Tavarua that a friend and I found in the 70s. It was an uninhabited island then. Now it's a resort, so it's a completely different thing. But in the 70s, it was uninhabited. We just camped there, and local fishermen would come by and bring us fresh water and so on. So Tavarua was a real highlight. Honolulu Bay on Maui was a great spot. When I was a kid, it was already crowded by the time I got there in 1971. And maybe another spot from the late 70s. It changed after this time, but in Australia, it's called Kira in southern Queensland. It's an incredible wave, and they changed the sort of dredging scheme on a nearby river, and the wave disappeared for many years. But I had it when it was also already very crowded.
You wrote about Jardim in Madeira, but it wasn't clear to me whether it's been ruined.
I think it has. I mean, some people say, no, on certain tides, certain swells, you can still surf it. They built a big jetty there. So it was just a magic wave in a very beautiful setting. Now it's in an industrial setting. You're surfing at the bottom of a huge wall of not even rocks, but these big cement jacks. And it's quite dangerous. It was always dangerous, but now it's worse with those. So I actually haven't been back. Went back once after they put in that wall, and was so disturbed that I've never gone back again.
Did you surf in New Zealand at all? Or
No, I've never been to New Zealand. Always wanted to go.
Oh, I thought you had. Tell me a little bit about where you grew up and how you got into doing what you do as a surfer, and that was how you made your life.
Sure. I was born in New York City, but I was raised in Southern California and took up surfing there in the 60s. You know, it was the thing to do. I was body surf for a few years and then took up board surfing, and didn't live at the beach, but close enough, got there often enough. And then my family moved to Hawaii. My dad got a job when I was 13 in Honolulu, and we moved there. And I was already been surfing for a couple of years, and so it was just a dream come true to move to Hawaii. And there we lived right near the water, and I surfed a ton and got to know some local guys who were really good surfers, and that kind of accelerated my surfing and my involvement with surfing just living in Hawaii. And by the time we moved back to California, back and forth a couple of times. My dad got more jobs in Hawaii, and then I dropped out of college and moved to Maui. And by then I was, a full-blown surf bum.
And how did you make a living during all that time?
Tons of little jobs on Maui. I worked in a bookstore in Lahaina. And I worked on the railroad for a few years after college. I was in California and saved some money. That's when I went on this big nearly 4-year trip through in the Southern Hemisphere, just surfing and picking up jobs along the way. I taught high school. I worked as a bartender in Australia. I worked construction, a lot of different, whatever was available. And I started freelance travel writing. That was helpful too.
Yeah. Then what decided you to come to New York? How did that all happen?
I got ambitious. I came back to the U.S. after these formative years, my 20s, basically spent overseas, and lived in San Francisco for a while. Wrote my first published book, which was about teaching high school in Cape Town in the bad old days of apartheid. And when that came out, it did pretty well. That was in '86, and that was when I moved. My girlfriend and I, now wife, moved from San Francisco to New York in '86.
I recall reading about that part of the book in the Barbarian Days, and you were very involved at that time with the politics of South Africa and with the apartheid and how it all fell apart and then came together with this remarkable man who had been in prison on an island offshore, which when I was there, I visited, and I'm sure you must have as well. And you seem to be very emotionally attached to politics even back then, and that must have been when you were there, because it was that quite a long time ago.
Yeah, it was. I landed up in Cape Town just looking for waves in the early '80s, very early '80s, and needed work. Got a job teaching in a township high school, in a black high school outside Cape Town, and it was actually life-changing for me because I was writing all the time. I was writing novels, unpublished novels at the time, and some travel writing, as I mentioned. But the situation in the school was so intensely political. I mean, the students went out on a strike for 3 months at one point, protesting apartheid in education, and the teachers were very much caught in the middle. And I really came to admire some of my students, some of my colleagues, some other people, activists, and just all I really cared about by that, by the time that year was over, was politics. And I switched careers. I started writing nonfiction and started writing about politics and power.
When did you first come to Montauk, and tell us about some of the people you met and places you enjoy in Montauk?
Yeah, I first memorable time in Montauk was in the early '90s. I went out there to meet a guy, a surfer, an illustrator named Peter Spacek, who spent a lot of time there. And I actually met him in the water at Ditch Plains. I got to his house and I got directions. No, paddle out here, and I'll see you. And so I met him in the water at Ditch. It was the first time I'd ever been tried to surf Ditch. And we got to talking. He was from California originally, really good surfer, great guy. And he said, "Welcome to my little paradise." And he didn't mean Ditch. He meant the reef breaks and further out. And which he was still exploring and getting to know. And we did a lot of that together. And I mean, within a couple of months, we'd caught a really good day at one of the rock reefs, which shall remain unnamed, further east. And those places were empty in the '90s. I mean, he and I would be the only people out on really, really good days. They're no longer empty.
And did you know Chip? I think Chip Duryea was one of the first surfers out here. Did you ever meet him?
No, I didn't. I wasn't that social in Montauk. I mainly surfed with Peter. He had a few friends. I got to know them. But I never lived in Montauk, or you hear about the sort of mystique of early Montauk surfing and the OGs of Montauk, but I never really knew them.
What are you working on now? Are you working on a new book?
Yeah, I actually have 2 books under contract. One's another memoir. It's about my days working on the railroad. I mentioned I worked as a freight brakeman in California for a few years. It was a really interesting time, interesting job. And so I'm writing a memoir about railroads and my time on the railroad. And I'm also writing a more reported book about surfing, not a memoir, but something I just got back from Hawaii. I was reporting there. I've been in El Salvador, and I'm going back there. Some of these other places, Indonesia, that I want to write about sort of what's going on there around surfing and some of the interesting characters. Surfing is quite transformed a lot of places. I don't think Montauk would quite qualify as one of them, but there are places with great waves that people from all over the world come to surf, and they transform those places. I'm going to write about Cape Town too. As a surfer in Cape Town, I'm interested in writing about. So it's a different kind of surfing themed book.
Thank you for being on the podcast. Bill's going to be speaking at the Montauk Library on Wednesday evening on July 14th.
June 14th.
I keep saying that. Why do I guess
yeah.
It's because I think with Memorial Day, it's summer, so it must be July. Anyway, June 14th. And tickets are available. And if I will see you then. And it was nice to have you on. And thanks for coming.
Thank you, Dan. See you next week.
Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.